This show is taped at La Cenne, a space for creation and collaboration. Artists, thinkers, and creators of all stripes tell us what inspires their work, a starting point that takes us into their creative process in their own words. Welcome to Who Inspires You. John Londono is a photographer and director of photography. After studying fine arts at Concordia University, he participated in exhibitions here in Canada and abroad. His director of photography debut was with the now legendary show Mange ta ville on RTV. Since then, he's been alternating between the fixed and the moving image, working in cultural, advertising, fashion, and editorial fields. He's worked with artists Grimes, Pierre Lapointe, Sigur Rós, Cœur de Pirate, and for campaigns from Centraide, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, Virgin Mobile, and Adidas. John, thanks for coming. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you straight up, who inspires you?
Actually, there's a lot of people who inspire me and a lot of mediums, but I think that I wanted to orient the conversation more on the aspects that are making my everyday life. And there's photography that a lot of people know, but there's also cinematography, which is relatively something new still
for you
in my life, you know, and in my career. So I've looked at some inspirations that came from photography that are also involved in video or cinema. And there's so many of those photographers that I enjoyed the work early on when I was just interested in photography or arts that are also involved in video or cinematography. And among them there's William Klein, there's Robert Frank, there's Anton Corbijn, there's Jean-Baptiste Mondino, and the list goes on.
William Klein is, one of the foremost known street photographers. His photography from the 50s is still very celebrated and appreciated even like 50, 60 years later. Why do you think he was so avant-garde and important?
I mean, I think that in your question you already have the answer. He was important because he was avant-garde.
Yeah.
He came from painting, so his eye and the way he composed street photography was completely different than what we were used to see at the time, and he had a proximity to his subjects that we weren't really used to. And at the time, the photographer and the view on the reality of what the image is going to become was always a point of view of someone floating like a ghost, like had kind of a distance with the subject. But Klein just came up close with wide angles and into the faces of people and crowds. And so it was kind of shocking, I think, for people at that time. I wasn't born in the 50s, but it really changed the way that street photography was done at the time. And in many other fields where he worked, like documentary, fashion photography, and also in fiction, it was always something really eclectic and very very artistic. I think that among all the people that I've named, Klein is probably the one that fits the best with my definition of an artist.
There's a lot of spontaneity in his photography. It's, it's street photography. And somehow he managed to keep that spontaneity even though he was doing editorial or fashion photography. How do you think that came about? I
think that he didn't make any compromise on whether he was shooting for Vogue or shooting for himself or shooting for a band or an artist. He would see each of his creation as something very personal, and that's what made striking images. I've done a lot of street photography and I still do, but much less than when I first started doing photography. And now I do a lot of artists and bands, and Klein did that as well, you know, and he photographed one of my favorite artists, Serge Gainsbourg, and his album was going to be called Love on the Beat, and he decided to shoot him as a woman. But Serge Gainsbourg had already more than 50 years old, you know, and so I think that all these ideas came from who he was and what he was exploring. So there was something very, very fashion about the Serge Gainsbourg image that ended up in, you know, in music history.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really because of his stubbornness, I think.
He directed a film called Who Are You, Polly Magoo?
Mm-hmm.
And it became kind of a major work of satire.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember seeing it the first time?
Yeah, I remember. I think that the most important thing I kept from that film, more than the images, you know, and the subject, is the courage that he had of again, you know, doing what he wanted to do rather than doing what people wanted him to do. And Vogue was one of his main source of income.
Yeah.
So fashion was his main source of income.
They supported him for many years, even though he wasn't even doing fashion photography for a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was always a collaborator. So by doing this satire of fashion industry, and especially of the editor of the time, he lost his job. So,
yeah.
So, you know, so there's something very courageous, you know, in wanting to just do what he wants and go through the subjects he wanted to go through and not really care about, you know, the repercussions that this could have in his own life, you know.
Yeah.
So it's it talks a lot about who he was. You know, I think there was something a bit punk to him, you know.
Yeah.
And there's something really interesting in the people that I've liked their work, and that's a common point. I think that they all have something, you know. Robert Frank had this beatnik thing to him, you know, and like they're not afraid of much, you know. He was really one of the Ginsberg, Kerouac.
Mm-hmm.
As a photographer, he was the most beatnik of all, and William Klein and Anton Corbijn much later had this punk side to them, you know, and it's very inspiring.
Anton Corbijn mixes, I guess, artists' work with more commercial work. Mm-hmm. I wonder how you see that relationship between more fine arts approach and the commercial work, because you do work in both worlds also.
Well, I'm preparing an exhibition right now, and this is something that has struck me, because theoretically, you know, you study arts and you it's something that you can also digest art. You know, you go to exhibitions, you watch magazines or websites, and you know, you're part of the art world, and then you can also be interested by other things like artists or music or, you know, whatever the subject, and explore this subject thoroughly and go through it like for a lifetime. But then, you know, the definition of an artist is very different in any of the milieus that you're in, the cities, sometimes the cultures and the countries. And Anton Corbijn always defines himself as an artist, you know, and he's been very, very, all through his life, he's been very determined, you know, to, for example, do a book as an artist and not just accept any offer of doing a book that's going to be a tabletop book about, you know, that would be sold in vinyl or music stores.
Yeah.
He completely refused that. He saw himself as an artist. So I don't have the pretension of, and I don't even know why I'm saying pretentious. I guess it's because of our culture here, but I'm not having the pretension of being an artist doing, you know, those kind of portraits. But I don't think that Anton has ever asked himself that question. You know, there is some sort of a separation here with, I mean, in Quebec or in Canada, maybe in general, but I mean, I can talk about Quebec for sure, between the editorial, commercial milieu and the art world. You know, and bigger markets like Paris or New York can easily show the work of artists or collaborators of magazines and like David LaChapelle or like Terry Richardson or Jürgen Teller. You know, they can mix. Nan Golden has also done a lot of editorial fashion work. Philippe Lorca, Di Corsia. There's many photographers who can exhibit and do that work, but here it's more difficult. And creating that exhibition now, and especially seeing like prints, in big, something that
Prints of your work.
Of my work.
Yeah.
Like I shot this summer the singer of Future Island and the band Future Island. And, when you see your work as being a cover of a magazine, a newspaper, or just like something on a website, you kind of diminish the quality of your work just by, and it's just natural for you to see it as a small thing, as something that has its that is fast to consommer. It's fast to look at. You can just go to the next.
Almost.
It's disposable kind of thing. And today, seeing that portrait I did of the singer, like almost 2 meters high, and like being able to see myself in his eyes, and in front of a print that you can't just pass by, I feel that the medium itself becomes art. Like the size of the. It's not for nothing. I think that photography, in the last, for 30 to 40 years, has always become bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
In the 50s we did small prints, and then 60s, 70s documentary was always like prints that are about this size, and now, we're seeing photography trying to imitate painting by being
on a huge scale.
On a huge scale, and I think I understand now.
Yeah.
Not having the pretension to do art, to just look at one of my portraits and go, okay, I see the importance that this medium and that way of presenting a work has on the viewer.
You, as a photographer, your images, your work is used in so many different ways, whether it's in print media or like on a huge billboard or in other formats through video. Do you find that the way you work differs depending on where it's going to land, where the image is going to land?
Yeah, well, in commercial works, you have to take that in mind all the time. The technology has to match with the usage
on a technical level.
On a technical level, and I think that that a big influence on my work was doing covers for Voir early in my career, because I really wanted to make that image that would make people stop and go like, oh, wow, who's that artist and who did the picture? And that's how everything started, literally for me, like people started recognizing those covers, because we had, a few collaborators doing covers, but people could recognize the images that I was doing. And I think that really influenced the way I do my photography, because I'm always trying to have that kind of impact.
You've worked with a lot of musicians, as has Anton Corbin. How does that change the way you work? What is your relationship with music? How do you use it in your work?
Well, it's, like your first question about who inspires you. I was, if it would have been what inspires you, I think music is really part of it. Yeah. And it's really, really strong. And I kind of discovered that after my university years at Fine Arts. I was so much into photography at the beginning that nothing else existed really, like darkroom and working with artists. I was working with Serge Clément, with Bertrand Carrière, and working for Le Mois de la Photo, and at the same time trying to finish my degree. So photography was taking all the space, but when I took kind of a distance and a break out of it, I discovered the music scene in Montreal, and it was so strong at that precise time when bands like Arcade Fire and The Deers were getting really popular, and
it was really an effervescent moment for Montreal music.
It was a wave, so I didn't really feel that I was doing anything conscious. I just was attracted by it. That was really funny, because I was on my last year of fine arts and looking for subjects, of how to on what am I going to work, and what I was attracted by were bands. And that was totally not a subject that I could really, pursue. So I had this parallel life, already doing, trying to do artwork in school, but going to shows and wondering why nobody was, documenting this or trying to capture some of that energy. So from my first images actually of a band, magazines started, wondering who I was, and that's how everything started.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any projects coming up in 2016?
In February, I should be in Cuba if everything goes well. I will be doing the cinematography on a feature film from a Quebecois director. And it's 5 weeks in Cuba, so that's the biggest project so far for.
Can we get the scoop of who it'll be?
the director?
Yeah.
Yann Lagarde.
Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I hope that everything goes well and that I'll actually be there in February. But that's the plan so far.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thank you.